In this video, we're going to talk about engagement in uncertain times, and there's a lot of uncertainty right now, so it's perfect timing. That's coming up right now. Hi there, I'm Andrea Adams, and the host of HR Shop Talk. On this show, you get expert insight into HR. I encourage you to subscribe to the show or to the podcast to keep learning from my guests. Today, my guest is Rob Catalano. Rob is a marketing guy who moved into HR and started a company called WorkTango. WorkTango is a listening platform to help us in HR and those employers we work with listen to our employees. Hi, Rob. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful. How are you?
Good. Was my description of what WorkTango does fairly accurate?
Yeah, I think listening to employees and understanding their sentiment about their experience at work is a big part of it. I think the only other thing is, well, how do we leverage those insights and data to actually enable action, to have our system recommend those learnings and those actions to individual leaders who have a big influence on engagement and performance of employees. So I think the world of employee feedback, we do it so we can do something about it, and that's a big part of what we do as well.
Good point. We're going to talk about some of that doing stuff as we move through today's conversation. So, as I just said, you provide that listening platform and you work on improving engagement. So you're in this space all the time. Can you give an overview of what you've been learning about engagement during the pandemic?
I think the biggest thing we learned is that no one had a book on this. We're all writing it together, and we're really trying to navigate and have agility in how we're responding to external environments that we never have seen before or have planned. And it's funny, you talk about employee listening. What we used to do once a year to hear the voice of our employees and measure engagement, it has really shifted to this continuous listening, this feedback, to really understand how our employees navigating through this. How can we adjust our approaches and processes to improve the employee experience, especially because they're going through rough times, and just a big focus on not just about engaging employees, but making sure they have a good work-life balance, they're doing well at home, they have the tools and information they need from a remote perspective. So it's added a whole other layer to how companies need to engage their employees. And I know that's what we're going to talk about today.
So what are you learning about how they need to engage their employees?
Well, I think a big trend, and not only in the last couple of years with the pandemic, but I think systemically over the last decade from an HR lens, is that companies are having to change how they interact with employees in so many different ways. I think about some of the major pillars of how HR has approached things in the past, like performance management, right? Well, once a year to have someone throw their goals into a system and a leader rate them 1, 2, or out of 3, again, isn't as motivating and isn't giving the data and insight to be able to understand people's performance and course correct and move things. From a communication perspective, right? What used to be, let's get the team together once a quarter, once a year to do an all hands, has had to shift to more frequent communication about what's changing in the company, why we're making these changes, given what's happening around us with COVID, or changes to how the office is being structured or not structured and working from home. And even things like what I was mentioning with employee feedback. How do we get more frequent and not just measuring things, but getting diagnostic feedback on what's working, what isn't, as we try and navigate through this. So if we think about all the pillars of engagement, like communication and leadership and components like that, I think, again, organizations are really taking stock in what have we done in the past, and guess what? It's not really going to work in terms of what it needs to look and feel like in the future.
From a leadership perspective, is what have we been doing that we shouldn't be doing?
I think what companies are starting to do is enable leaders in different ways, and I think that's really critical to help leaders get through these uncertain times. I think the other way I would answer your question, I think there's things that leaders are not doing things that they should be doing moving forward, like having an empathetic eye to how their employees have to work in these type of environments. If we think about our employees, they're going through wellness issues and concerns all across the map, whether it's physical, social, mental, financial.
Mhm.
So I think leaders really have to step up in terms of having that connectivity and that emotional
Mhm.
intelligence for employees. I think communication is a big thing, right? No longer can your employee look over their shoulder and ask a question to a colleague or have the
Right.
attention of a leader or see how they're feeling in the organization. So just a bigger cadence and rituals of actually meeting with employees and
Mm,
having that connectivity and
yeah.
being available and building those connections. And the reality is that that gets back to just expectations and building alignment with employees, which again, whether that's goal setting, whether that's performance, whether that's listening to their experiences.
Hmm.
Those are just some examples that I think leaders
Hmm.
can really step up or need to step up their game in these uncertain times.
You talk about, HR needing to step up and leadership needing to up as well. Do you have any ideas on how HR and leadership could work better together to do those things?
I think one suggestion that leaders and HR can really take stock of what's happening in their own organization and learn lessons to impact a better employee experience is think about
Hmm.
the other stakeholders in your company. Right? You
Hmm.
have customers, you have
Hmm.
your actual shareholders, for example, depending on the organization. Well, you don't check in with your customers once a year. You have so many technology
Yeah.
investments and approaches to know your customer inside and out,
Yeah.
listen to them so you can
Yeah.
provide them a better experience,
Yeah.
provide them situations where you can actually reward and recognize them for
Hmm.
working with you or referring
Hmm.
other customers. You do everything in your power to effectively, retain and inspire customers. How do we take that same lens to say, well, what are we doing from an employee perspective? Are we investing the
Hmm.
same amount of time, the same concepts and ideas of what we do for them?
Hmm.
I always say from a financial perspective, right? We don't look at our numbers once a year. We don't. We have
Hmm.
just a different approach on how we manage our business, which is much more
Hmm.
intentional and day in and day out. How do we
Hmm.
leverage that concept for our employees themselves? So that's one real easy way is to look at what a company's already doing and find out how can we implement that into the employee experience.
Okay, so can we talk a little bit about the impact of uncertainty specifically on employees? It makes intuitive sense that it's disruptive, but can you put better language around that? Can you describe the impact that uncertainty has on employees?
Yeah, so first thing I think is just acknowledging that there's uncertainty for our employee base. What
Mhm.
frustrated me throughout this whole pandemic is all the news articles and items we talked about was the markets are crashing, this industry is doing terrible, but we forgot about the employees, that the people, the human beings that make up actual companies and what uncertainty is happening to them. And
Mhm.
I always say that our employees, they're facing what I call this whole wave of uncertainty, right? There's uncertainty on the pandemic, there's uncertainty on policies at work. There's uncertainty on how they're going to manage their kids, maybe going to school today, maybe not going to school today. But there's all, and you know that really well. But
Yeah.
there's all this uncertainty employees are facing. And when you actually look into and understand what that does to a human being, no one's at their best when it comes to uncertainty. When you think about change, people go through major change models and how they think about things. They first hear a change like we're going to work remotely. Well, there's denial, right? Then they move into concepts of letting go and saying this isn't really what I want to do. But it's up to us as companies and organizations and leaders to really get them to internalize those changes, understand what they really mean, and get them to move forward, right? No one likes
Mhm.
change, but that's what uncertainty is. It's not being aware of what change is going to influence
Mm.
me as an individual or my family or my team, and in some cases the company and the outlook on how successful an organization can be.
Mhm.
So when you ask about uncertainty and the impact, it's a place where no one wants to be, and that's why we have a responsibility to communicate, to really understand what people are going through and try to help them along that journey.
Mhm. What does engagement, in uncertain times look like?
If you think about the change curve I was just mentioning, right, where you
Yeah.
start off
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
uncertainty and
Yeah.
denial, and then you
Yeah.
let go, and then you
Yeah.
internalize, your levels of engagement actually shift dramatically during that time as well. Like
Okay.
hearing a new change personally for yourself or an announcement at the organization. well, your engagement kind of drops a bit, right? I don't know what's going to happen next. I don't know what
Yeah.
influence that's going to be on
Yeah.
me. I don't know if I have job security. I don't
Yeah.
know, what that's going to mean. And
Yeah.
even personally, right? You might have someone who at home had a partner who lost their job because of COVID, and they're trying to figure out that world, and their engagement in the organization goes down. So
Mhm.
I literally have, and sometimes when I do these talks, I have this chart where on one side is actually people's engagement, the other side and axis is their kind of stages of change. And I think they're really correlated, right? And anytime
Mhm.
someone's going through rapid change where there's uncertainty, engagement levels go down, right? It's how do
Mhm.
we as organizations try to, again, all those things that I mentioned earlier, like communicate, get alignment to help them really understand what the outcomes could look and feel like. And if we don't
Mhm.
know, again, work collectively as a company to help people get to that place.
If you've learned a few things during this conversation, subscribe to see all the episodes and comment. What are you learning about engagement and how to engage employees during change and during the pandemic? Let us know in the comment section. So, I've been hearing probably since I started working that uncertainty is a fact of life and get used to it. So, how do you respond to that?
Uncertainty is a fact of life, but I think our responsibility, our duty as leaders, as organization, is to build an environment where people can have a great employee experience, right? If there's uncertainty in your organization, they'll find happiness elsewhere, so to speak. So I think it's up to us to be able to help people through that uncertain time and
Mm-hmm.
through that change. And we talked
Mm-hmm.
about some of those items like communication, making sure people understand not only what's happening but why. And there's a lot of research out there that when you have transparency from a leadership perspective, that does
Mm-hmm.
increase and boost engagement. So I think that we still have to do our part in terms of getting people through those uncertain
Mm-hmm.
times.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the reality is everyone thinks that it's some huge strategy that you need to think about, but the reality is it can be really simple as well. Like, how do
Yeah.
you recognize employees for going above and beyond in those uncertain times, wearing multiple hats? Gratitude is free. Why aren't we doing that to really help people, bolster the positivity through these types of environments? So just small tactics like that that I think, we need to help employees get through. The only other point I'll make on uncertainty is that if you're an employee and you have a role, but you're not completely sure about what you need to do to get that role, you're not completely sure what success looks like,
Mm-hmm.
that's not a great place to be. And you want that level of certainty and understanding so that there's alignment between what you are supposed to do in your role and what the
Mm-hmm.
expectations of your organization or
Mm-hmm.
leadership is. So that's just a really great example. We don't want to individually be in that place. So again, we would want to help our employees build that alignment and remove that uncertainty so they can be successful as well. It's beneficial for them, for the
Mm-hmm.
individual leader, but also for the company at large.
You've learned how employers can engage employees better during times of great uncertainty. Can you, can you sort of package that up and summarize those in a list?
Yeah, I'd say there's four major things that I would identify as really critical ways to engage employees through uncertain times that we're
Okay.
all going through, especially as
Yeah.
employees. One would be definitely over communicating. It's not communicating just what's happening in the company, but why is critical, and people need to
Okay.
understand why decisions are being made. But one thing
Mm-hmm.
about communication is everyone always thinks in uncertain times communication's one way, but it should be two-way. What
Yes.
feedback do we have? What
Yes.
ideas do employees have? How are they part of the process of helping a company get through uncertainty like through COVID? So
Mm-hmm.
number one is really communication is key. The second is I'm going to say rituals and structure around communication. When there's
Okay.
uncertainty and there isn't a check-in with an employee for weeks or months or quarters at
Mm-hmm.
the individual leader level or at the company level, it's really difficult for people to, one, know when they can have an outlet to have conversation, but two, if they don't have any connection with leadership or the organization over a long period of time, uncertainty swirls, right? So I
Right.
call it a continuous feedback structure. What is your structure, individual leader wise, department wise, and company wise, to have conversations and make sure that you're removing that uncertainty and having a structure and a cadence to do it and sticking to that. The third, emotional intelligence is critical, right? It is important for leaders to try and meet people where they're at, to not only understand what people are going through, but do what they can to relate to it. Again, it's critical to really figure out and understand where people are at, even if you don't have that experience. And even the attempt at empathy, again, goes a long way in building those relationships and helping people through these times. And the reality is, there is a lot of data out there showing that empathetic leaders have much more engaged teams. And the fourth, I'd say, is leveraging leaders. Leaders have the biggest influence on employees. We talked about this earlier. Whether it's HR or leaders having the biggest influence. At the end of the day, HR can run a lot of programs, conduct a lot of structure, have a lot of communication, but it's the leaders that are really having those day-to-day discussions and need to be part of that process. So those are four critical themes that HR can really sink their teeth into. I think that are critical to help employees through these uncertain times. Based on your question.
Yeah, those times leaders in HR are experiencing all that uncertainty themselves as well, and now they have to go out and be empathetic. That's hard for the leaders and for HR to do.
Well, I mean, we're in those positions at the end of the day to enable employees, right? HR is to build a great employee experience. Leaders are meant to build a successful team and enable their employee to be successful. So, we're in those roles, and even though we're feeling the same levels of uncertainty, we need to step up for our team. I think the bigger challenge that people face in that situation is they don't know how to focus on that emotional intelligence for their team, or how to really step up in these times. I have some thoughts in terms of how companies or how leaders can do that, but I think it's just part of our duty to do so. And maybe what might be helpful is that when it comes to a leader or an individual HR not really knowing where to start when it comes to being empathetic, I think there's a few things that they can do. One is, again, really try and understand and listen. What are people going through? Be a sounding board. Again, coming in and recommending actions and what someone could do isn't what people are looking at when they're uncertain and stressed. So just listening and trying to relate to what they're doing is a big part of it. Second one is really, doubling down on gratitude. How do you make sure that you're recognizing for their efforts and what they're doing to try to get out of it? I find it's a really good way. It's a simple way to help people through uncertain times, especially from an emotional intelligence lens. The other thing too is really connecting on a deeper sense of purpose, right? What was really fantastic in the time of COVID early days, where organizations, even when their companies were floundering or they couldn't sell their products or services because things were shut down, they were surrounding their organization on purpose. At WorkTango, we have our passion statement to improve work lives. Like, we were selling technology to HR people, and HR people had other things to do. So we just rallied around that purpose and passion, and we just started educating people and finding speakers and helping them with free templates. And so I find when people are uncertain and you want to really focus on emotional intelligence, how do we connect on a deeper sense of purpose? I find is a really great way. And then the last thing is engagement also includes well-being, right? If you want to be emotionally intelligent, how do you make that person better, whether it's physically with what they need at home in these times, for example, whether it's the mental capacity to take time and be flexible in their schedule. So just a few ideas and thoughts on how someone can step up and approach having that emotional intelligence for their team when they're unsure about where to start that journey. What's interesting about this whole uncertain time is the question keeps being asked is, well, what do we do to engage our employees through these times, right? Again, it's tougher to have them be more engaged, and we have to change all of our approaches. And you're right, there are things you have to change, or you have to adjust slightly for the different environment we're in. But the one thing that HR shouldn't lose focus on is that at the end of the day, whether your employee is, uncertain or certain, whether they're sitting in a coffee shop or at home or in an office, there are still fundamental things that still engage employees, right? They want and need career development, right? They need to have care for their personal well-being, right? You need to set expectations and have accountability of what employees and teams need to do, right? They need to be
Mhm.
recognized. You need to listen and offer feedback. So all the things that you're originally doing as an HR leader or as a business to engage your employees, those don't just go away, right? You can't just stop doing what you're doing, stop your engagement strategies and your rituals. You still need to do those things. Those are still important to employees. And I just don't want people to lose focus on that as well.
Okay. That is an excellent reminder. All right. Thanks, Rob. That was great. Rob and I did an episode on the employee voice, and you can check that out right here. Rob has also today talked about gratitude and appreciation. And I just did an episode with Sarah McVannell, and that episode is here. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.